monthly monthly seminar series. We try to identify topics of interest to activist-oriented people, as well as those that are trying to learn more about Prout and neo-humanism. So we invite suggestions about topics of interest that you would like to see addressed. And we're also interested in if some of you have areas of interest or expertise that you would be willing to share with others. We invite you to get in touch, and we'd like to get a program scheduled for you at some point. Basically, we have programs actually scheduled up through almost the middle of the year at this point, and I'll touch on a couple of them. Next month, in March, we have Prout and Other Progressive Movements by Roar Bionis. And I think it will be a very interesting topic. This is a person with 40 plus years of, in-depth Prout-focused work, author of 2 published books about Prout. And I think it'll be a really wonderful overview of some of the other things, that are out there in society that have some possible parallels, but some differences with Prout. And so I look forward to his presentation very much. And that will be on the 13th. And I'm not sure if it's up for registration right now, but if it's not, within the next day or so, you should see that. And then coming up in April, collaboration in economic and social justice work by Dr. Chris Duffin. It's interesting, the program, and I appreciate the way she's kind of couched it. Collaboration is much more than discussion. And she really digs into the importance of what that really looks like. And she comes from, she's a clinical psychologist who's done education, consulting work, very active in these areas, kind of comes from an eco-psychological perspective. Has been, I guess, a serious student of Sarkar's work since the 70s, and really uses that kind of lens in whatever work she's doing or project she's working on. So I think we should all really look forward to that, and just the vital importance of understanding how to really reach out, work with others, collaborate, and get a real broad spectrum movement underway. The other one that I'll touch on and then get to the main program is climate change adaptation through economic democracy. And that will be presented by Sri Raksha Mohan. She's a graduate engineering software engineer, but is currently studying for an advanced degree in economics, and has done some just incredible research and papers. And so I think we'll all look forward to what she has to share. The program this evening is Financing Economic Development under Prout. I appreciate, and it's by Professor, or he prefers just Mark, but Dr. Friedman. And basically, he's touching on something that is so important in the Prout arena. And that's that we have a lot of theory, but there are some real challenges on how we're going to actually implement some of these things. And capitalization is just a fundamental issue. And I think Dr. Friedman is going to address some of the questions that we really need to answer in the course of trying to, how are we going to build alternatives and in something that is in compliance or within the basic parameters that we anticipate being important in a Prout-based and neo-humanism-based economy. Dr. Friedman has done many things, most recently retired from a career of teaching economics in college. And again, brings, he's done research in so many important areas, and we appreciate that he's taken on this, I frankly think kind of a daunting topic, but one that's vitally important to address. I will share two things about Dr. Friedman before I turn the program over to him. One is that he also sits on the work group that puts together these monthly seminars and has just been instrumental in helping ensure that we actually have a program every single month. And so I think tonight's maybe our 37th in a row and still have programs scheduled up through the middle of the year. The other thing I will share with him is that he is not related to Milton Friedman by family or by ideology, which some of you may find very reassuring. So at this point, I'm happy to turn it over to Dr. Friedman.
Thank you. Very kind words. So I hope this is not a dry topic. It looks like it has generated some interest because I think people recognize that it is an important topic. We know that Pierre Sarkar, the founder of Prout, gave an incredible broad outline of Prout and left a lot of details for us and society to work out. And a lot of that is going to have to be worked out in practice. So what I've tried to do is draw together some things that he has said to give us guidance and perhaps speculate a little bit about how that can be applied for economic development. And where my comments are speculative, I hope it's clear, and they're intended to raise discussion rather than to be authoritative in any way. This came about through discussions with Dr. Tapan Malik, who is also on the committee that's putting on this series of presentations. And unfortunately, life took him in other directions. So some of this might be going in directions that he did not intend. And he should not be blamed for that. That should be entirely the blame should entirely come to me. And I think he probably would have wanted to bring up some issues that I likely neglect. So, of course, this is something that can be expanded on quite a bit, and I hope others take on the work to do that. Okay, well, let me go ahead and show you what I've pulled together here. Okay, so some basic ideas of economic understanding of uh, how capital is formed and what investment goods are and so forth. So society is presented with something of a trade-off, a choice, you might say, between producing either what might be called consumption goods, things that, perhaps personal cars, food, clothing, etc., or capital goods, or services for that matter. We can define capital goods as human-made things that produce other things. That's as opposed to things that come from nature. That's you can think of capital that's created by Mother Nature. Generally, we think of capital as human-made things that again produce other things. So we're talking about factory machinery, farmers' tractors, office computers, etc. And if we choose to produce more of these things, well, then we can increase our productive capacity, perhaps to allow more consumption in the future. So again, we have a choice and trade-off, how we want to balance that choice. So producing capital goods means sacrificing some current consumption. A word for that can be savings. Okay, so, well, I used to be a baker back when I earned an honest living. And so I might have had a choice between increasing my income or setting aside some income to buy an oven. Okay, so that would be saving for a productive purpose. So ultimately, all capital goods that go into expanding our productive ability comes from some kind of savings, as we'll discuss. There are different ways for society to save, but ultimately, then involves that trade-off between producing consumption goods or capital goods. Um, so again, capital production comes from saving. And the methods are going to vary with different institutional frameworks. So we'll discuss different present institutional frameworks and perhaps some of their defects and what Prout proposes or may adopt. So uh, we can also use the term investment. Economists use the term investment, meaning that we're creating or purchasing capital goods, productive equipment. Investment to the common person on the street might mean uh, financial transactions, trying to increase your wealth. Economists understand investment as specifically as investment in capital goods. Okay, so Savipras are service-oriented moralists who would be at the helm of a proudest economy, would have to create institutional frameworks for investment to allow the economy to progress in numerous ways and to make the economy work for the people in that economy. So different kinds of investment we consider. Purchase of new productive equipment, maintaining equipment, um, skill development, human capital, and an aspect of Proudist thinking or a parallel to Prout would be neo-humanist education. And that will require investment. That sort of investment we call human capital. Um, uh, Proudest economists think that that will be a unique contribution to a proudest economy, that particular investment that will allow an economy to be particularly productive because the people in the economy will be more creative and more productive and more in tune with genuine human needs. So we can think of neo-humanistic education as a proudest kind of investment. And scientific research is a kind of investment as well. So how does investment happen in a current economy? So that would include expansion of enterprises or creation of new enterprises. Well, the motivation is going to be the profit motive. Investment is going to go towards what is perceived to be the most profitable. Um, some economists will say that dynamic leads to an efficient economy. Well, there are instances where that can be the case. There are many instances that Proutist economists and others uh, from other traditions will demonstrate does not lead to efficiency as any reasonable person would define it. Um, so kinds of institutional frameworks, there are securities markets. So these all come from savings, right? There are savings generated in capitalist economy, and that goes into these kinds of capital markets. So that would include stocks. In other words, people can invest in corporations or big firms by purchasing shares, and we can buy and sell those shares also on stock markets. There are bond markets. Bonds are more or less IOUs. They're kinds of loans that you can purchase to finance a corporation or finance governments as well. And then there are very complex financial instruments that are unique to a capitalist economy. We'll talk about them in a moment. That we've seen before in the um, uh, immediately before the Great Recession. There are these complex financial instruments that destabilize the economy to create a worldwide so-called Great Recession that could reasonably be called a depression. Okay, other institutions. So there's venture capitalists, people with a lot of money looking for a high return on that money, and they will finance new ventures that look promising again, look profitable. That can be a positive thing. My son has a pharmaceutical startup, and he's created a drug that I think will be of great benefit to society. And he's appealed to venture capitalists, and they agreed that it's promising. Um, uh, Venture capitalists can also finance enterprises. I'm sure all of us can think of that are less positive for society. And there's private equity firms. These are, along with, say, hedge funds, they're generally firms that accumulate savings from very wealthy people to invest in firms, a lot of times to buy firms. Here's where the efficiency of capitalism comes into question. Again, with a profit motive, they'll buy these firms. Sometimes they'll strip them of their assets for very quick profit. Other times, they'll milk them over a long period of time. Even though they own these firms, they'll charge the firms for so-called management fees or uh, uh, what would you call it? Well, for providing advice to them, consulting fees, um, placing considerable burdens on firms that sometimes cause them to fail. So again, all in the name of profit, sometimes short-term profit. Um, and then there's the banking system. Again, banks will lend uh, according to what they believe to be holds promise for profit. Then there's public infrastructure, uh, public capital goods like roads, bridges, things like that, perhaps internet, perhaps water treatment. Um, they can be financed through taxes. Another thing I didn't mention, frequently user fees. For example, if you go to a national park, we can think of that as a kind of public capital good, um, or capital certainly has to go into those things. There are user fees involved there. Then the bond market. Governments from at least in the United States, from the federal to the municipal level, will sell bonds, and these are those IOUs. There's a promise to pay back with interest the value of the bond. Now, the question arises, um, is it better to be a grasshopper or an ant? Well, the question arises from the Aesop's fable that you might remember. I spring that on my students, and nobody knows, none of them know uh, have the foggiest idea of what I'm talking about. But I hope some of you have a bit of cultural education, know what the grasshopper and the ant is about in Aesop's fables. Essentially, the ant, well, the ants work very diligently throughout the summer to produce grain, and they store grain for the winter. Whereas the grasshopper was playing music and partying all summer, and he complains, "Well, I just didn't have time to store away any grain." And so he comes to the ants at the end of autumn and says, "Well, I'm very hungry. Could you spare some of your grain?" And the ants, in disgust, turn their back on him. Well, should we be like the grasshopper uh, or the ant? Um, well, um, according to Prout, it's really not an obvious choice. So uh, in favor of the ant. We It's part of our ethic as spiritual aspirants and people who have a social consciousness to practice a paragraha, voluntary simplicity. So we may think that evolved people may find accumulation or consumption for its own sake uh, not particularly meaningful. That's to surround ourselves with things. Why bother? It's not something that's fulfilling. Um, and overall, it's instilled in us that thrift is seen as a virtue and part of a disciplined life, right? Um, and also we can say that, as we've already made the point, savings are necessary for the production of capital goods for increasing our consumption in the future. So we should be like the ant, right? Well, it's not necessarily an obvious choice. Um, is part of perhaps a controversial idea from Keynesian economics. There's the so-called paradox of thrift. Um, Particularly if there's an economic downturn, if there's some uncertainty, people will automatically stop spending. Well, what happens in the economy? People stop spending and the downturn gets worse, right? And ultimately, even though people are saving, there's going to be less savings because the overall economic activity in the economy declines so much. Okay. In other words, in the terms of Sarkar, money stops rolling, right? Sarkar famously said that money should be rolling in the economy. A dynamic economy involves rolling of money. In other words, continuous circulation of money. Um, Another kind of downside of savings is that it's kind of a factor of inequality. Um, there, uh, is something called a marginal propensity to consume and marginal propensity to save. In other words, how much additional income are you inclined to save or to spend? Well, marginal propensity to consume tends to go down as you get richer. Do rich people consume more? Well, certainly. But as a portion of their income, they're going to be consuming considerably less. And so they're going to be saving more. Well, what happens when there's a great deal of inequality in society and income becomes concentrated at the top? Well, there's going to be a lot of savings, and that all that money is going to be looking for high return. Another aspect of the marginal propensity to consume um, is that rich people are less risk averse. You and um, I don't think there are multi-billionaires on the call. Um, if there are, excuse me, but if uh, there's less, uh, you and I are going to be pretty careful with, say, our retirement savings. We're not likely to put it into overly speculative kind of investments, even if there's a potential promise of high return. Whereas a very rich person is very likely going to set aside a substantial portion of their savings to put into more speculative kinds of investments that would promise a higher return. So, with these kinds of speculative investments that might go sour, that introduces instability into the economy, the likelihood of great losses, like we saw in the financial crisis before the Great Recession. So, part of that uh, it's been turned a giant pool of money that was kind of sloshing around before the Great Recession, looking for investments. So that kind of created a demand for these kinds of destabilizing, complex financial instruments. You might have remember from that era the terms mortgage-backed securities and collateralized debt obligations, CDO. Uh, so there were then CDO squared and CDO cubed. In other words, taking some of these financial instruments that were rated not as safe and into kind of separate collections that were called then CDO squared. And from there, some of those were identified as, well, potentially safe investments, and they were sold that way. And then it was uh, uh, it, the instruments were kind of collected again, and that was called CDO cubed, and more of those potential securities that, again, from the less safe, some safer securities were identified from that, and so forth. Well, the house of cards, of course, collapsed, and the world economy suffered as a result of that. So again, uh, supposedly economists have said, well, all these things increase the efficiency of the economy. Well, those of us who look at it as a house of cards will question that. Um, so there's a further problem with wealth concentration that way, is that there's really insufficient people invest in these kinds of securities because there are really not enough really productive investment opportunities for the savings to go into. Okay. So what is I mean by this? Perhaps the grasshopper is right, not the ant. Okay, so there's something to be said for the grasshopper, uh, according to Prout. Um, so again, the Prout ethic is keep the money rolling, keep spending the money. Um, so a quote from Sarkar is let governments be active, spending money, let people purchase as much rice, pulses, vegetable oil, salt, sugar, etc., as they can with their money. Let money go to the grocers, the sugarcane vendors, the confectioners, the factory workers, the laborers, and the weavers. And let the colorful saris of the weavers be purchased and worn by newly married brides, adding to the beauty and prosperity of society. Okay, so uh, Sarkar seems to be aware of the paradox of thrift. Prosperity requires not only savings and production of capital goods, but also spending, adequate spending, what economists might call aggregate demand. Without adequate aggregate demand, then there's no reason for investment. If people are not willing to buy stuff, then investment will not happen also. So other evidence from Prout literature, kind of, I would say, hate to say Sarkar is aligned with the grasshopper, but let's see what Prout literature tells us. So it's very important that banks not unnecessarily withhold lending. Banks should definitely be lending their assets. They again contributing to the rolling of money. So another quote from Sarkar from Keep the Money Rolling. The intrinsic demonic greed of the banks must not be allowed to jeopardize the life of common people. So how is that greed expressed in under capitalism? Well, exploitive lending practices, against that we saw in the financial crisis. Uh, People were encouraged to take loans that were really beyond their ability to pay back. Even so, unqualified borrowers were encouraged to borrow anyway, and even qualified borrowers were encouraged to take on loans under worse uh, uh, terms than they were qualified for. So that would be example of demonic greed, I would guess. And then after the reaction occurs in society as a result of those practices, and there's an economic downturn, then banks are going to withhold their money. There's what's sometimes called a banker strike. They can hoard money in times of uncertainty, and that happened in the Great Recession, in spite of all the efforts of the government and the Federal Reserve to try to get banks to kind of do their duty after they were bailed out. Um, so Prout wants banks to lend again in a responsible manner, but it wants banks to lend in a consistent manner. So Prout encourages low interest rates as a development tool. Um, so that's fine, but we should be aware that low interest rates encourage spending rather than saving. So is there a bias towards spending in Prout rather than savings? Perhaps. So we have to develop other institutional savings still have to occur in society, but we have to develop other institutional frameworks for that to happen. So are there less personal savings under Prout? I would say yes. Um, For one thing, minimum requirements are guaranteed, so there's less need for cautionary savings. For example, when China discontinued a lot of its uh, public services and safety net programs in its so-called reforms, savings went way up, perhaps too much, because people were saving for cautionary reasons. Um, we expect there to be greater economic stability. So again, uh, 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 in response to potential depression, some economists, Proudist economists in particular, encouraged Proudists and members of Ananda Marga to increase their savings. But under Prout, there's going to be greater economic stability. So that means less need for savings. Um, Also, extra amenities for the meritorious, a term uh, uh, for that is ad rictum in Prout philosophy. That is encouraged under Prout to be provided by firms in terms of extra goods and services, as well as extra privileges. Um, uh, More than monetary income. Again, increased monetary income is part of incentives in Prout, but it's not the only part of Prout. So again, for some of these kinds of extra amenities, perhaps a larger house, perhaps uh, access to transportation, like say an electric car. It may be provided by the firm for someone who needs it. Um, so, uh, and then there's some fundamental rule of Prout that there's no wealth accumulation without permission from society. Okay, so if there's differences in income that's provided for the good of society to provide incentives, well, that might provide some wealth accumulation. We can think of that as kind of a tacit permission of the collective body because it's calibrated to ad rictum, increases in incomes that provide for proportionate increase in service to society. Um, but otherwise, other wealth really cannot be accumulated under Prout without some kind of without direct or clear permission from society. And we'll talk a little bit about how that might happen. Again, that's going to be a little bit speculative as well. Um, so, um, how are we going to be financing economic development? Well, we'll be developing a cooperative banking system. A model like that might be the Mondragon system in Spain, where it's a network of cooperatives that they have a economic development system where the cooperatives help each other and they promote new cooperatives and help finance other cooperatives. Part of that is through a cooperative banking system. So the banking system will help finance other cooperatives through the deposits of the firms in the cooperative system. But it's also going to be linked with a planning system. So most planning will be at the block level. That might be that's a term that is more understood in India. It can be roughly analogous to perhaps county level in the U.S. And then there's going to be higher levels of planning as well. So there will be autonomous bodies that are responsible for planning for the public interest. And they will likely be providing permission for development, for accumulation, for the development of new cooperative firms or other kinds of firms. Um, so they may work hand in hand with the banking system. So the banking system might be given some degree of autonomy to approve loans under certain criteria that may be given by the block level planning, or there may be direct permission sought from block level planners or higher level planners for example, development loans. So a little bit more on the banking system. Sarkar does call for central banks in a lot of ways. For what he seems to describe uh, is not that different from current banking systems in capitalist countries. Uh, except for the motivation behind them. The motivation is consumption, in other words, providing commodities that the public wants and needs. Um, Perhaps I didn't mention it here, but again, a primary motivation is going to be providing for minimum requirements. That's going to be prioritized before other things are going to be produced by the planning system. So, yes, firms will have to be viable if they're going to be financed. Cooperatives will have to be potentially viable before they're going to be financed. But the ultimate motive is going to be for the public good. It's not to make cooperative members rich or other kinds of firms rich. So it's likely the central bank will likely govern the banking system for a socio-economic unit, may be identified as a nation state at certain development of level development of Prout. It may be for a lower level of maybe a state, something like that. So again, that's something that'll have to be developed in practice. What is the region that's going to be governed by a central bank? At some time, is there going to be a world central bank that governs other central banks? Again, this is something that products are going to have to think about and will probably be developed as we go along to a lot of extent. Again, governed by public interest rather than profit motive. uh, provides, it's going to likely provide lending guidelines or criteria for what is allowed for lending. And it's going to channel money to banks. Currently, the primary way to get money into banks by most central banks around the world is by buying various kinds of bonds, mostly government bonds, from banks. And that will get money, more money into the banking system. Um, Another means is by lending money to banks by the central bank. Um, so, how developed is or how prominent is a bond market going to be under Prout? Well, we'll be talking about that in a moment, but again, that's going to be a matter of speculation. Probably the central bank will be lending to banks, to central banks, or to local banks. Um, Central bank will have the money it holds backed by gold. Again, that's kind of a mistake I believe that Proutists make, is that we think that we call for um, current banking systems to be backed by gold. Well, Sarkar says it can only work under Prout. It's not going to work under contemporary systems. And there's some discussion among Proutist economists. Well, why does Sarkar want a proudest banking system to be backed by gold? It kind of goes against our training in conventional economics. And so there's some speculation about that I won't go into now. But it one reason is that it may increase the perception of stability of the currency. But again, that's speculation on my part. And a duty of the central bank will be to prevent inflation. Oops. Now, sorry. Oops. Sorry. Okay. So inflation can, in fact, be a way to enforce savings. And some developing countries have intentionally had a policy of encouraging inflation that allows in essentially printing money to purchase public infrastructure that is important for development. And there isn't so much of a developed means for collecting taxes. So it kind of is a substitute for collecting taxes. It does reduce the consumption of the people for consumer goods and kind of forces that trade off towards capital good. Uh, does Sarkar like that idea? Well, no. Sarkar is opposed to producing inflation and the instability that can happen. It can get out of hand very easily. And so Sarkar says that governments have to be very careful about printing money. Um, so borrowing by government and businesses also should be for productive purposes only. That seems like an obvious point, but it's not always practiced. Again, governments might take international loans to build great palaces for the president, and uh, corporate heads and uh, heads of large businesses can become very arrogant and believe that they deserve very opulent offices and things like that. So Sarkar makes a point of saying that that's should not be a purpose of borrowing, and banks will be careful of that. And that will also help control inflation because if government and private spending is specifically for private purposes, of course, that will expand production. With more production, then that prevents inflation. Inflation is too many dollars buying too few goods. Well, the solution is to increase the productive capacity so that there are not too few goods. So, some quotes from Sarkar: the banking system will have to be managed by cooperatives. The central or federal bank will be controlled by the immediate or local government. So, central banks should be controlled by as local government bodies as possible. Banks must not allow unwise administrators or governments to print monetary notes indiscriminately without reserving the proportionate amount of bullion in their treasuries. So again, he emphasizes that is under an established Prout system. Okay, so Prout has a three-tiered industrial structure. So how would financing occur in the three tiers? Well, first, there's a small business sector of privately owned businesses. Um, Presumably, they would be bank financed. and expansion would happen through bank financing. Again, that would be permission to accumulate, according to the first fundamental principle of Prout. Coordination, and as we said, that this would be coordinated with local planning authorities. Now, small businesses would be responsible for producing some of the nice things in life, what we might call luxuries, um, uh, kind of specialty bakeries, things like that. Um, so there's room for that in a proud economy. So they should not receive discrimination from lending authorities. Privately owned firms, under appropriate criteria, um, should get proper financing and proper consideration from the planning and lending authorities. Um, it's an open question, again, a matter of speculation. Uh, Sarkar talks about cottage industries, even cottage industries feeding cooperatives producing necessities. He talks about cottage industries even producing the car industry or feeding the car industry. Um, are there going to be separate microcredit institutions, or would that be part of ordinary banking for very small, very micro industries or very small scale industries? Um, so, would these industries be financed with personal savings? Perhaps a little bit, but it would be very limited, again, because accumulation is limited in a proud economy. Um, so cooperatives may have their own regional banking system that serves cooperatives exclusively. Again, that is speculative. That's a possibility. Um, uh, in any case, it would be linked with planning authorities. Again, some approval mechanism would be required. Um, Enterprises would have to conform to the plan produced by block level or higher level planning. Uh, it the Lending may be linked with coaching or mentoring services for new enterprises, new cooperatives, or existing cooperatives. Again, the decisions would be for consumption, not for profit. What are the needs of the communities, and in particular, prioritizing minimum requirements before other things are financed. And we would certainly look to the financial viability of the firms. Is it likely to be successful? Again, proudest cooperatives and small businesses will operate in a marketplace. Again, well, not again, but markets are not necessarily capitalist institutions. Capitalism involves profit simply through ownership. Markets can exist in a, a, a cooperative framework like we're talking about here. Um, Sarkar also talks about cooperatives saving some of their earnings. So there would be retained earnings that would contribute to investment as well. Okay. Um, so, some special characteristics of cooperatives. This is taken largely from a scholar of kind of the perhaps the authoritative scholar of cooperative economies, Yaroslav Vanyek, wrote a very thick tome called the General Theory of the Labor Managed Economy. So, cooperatives will tend to be more capital intensive. So, uh, actually, cooperatives will buy more machinery and so forth than a comparable capitalist firm. Workers, for example, would be willing to invest in ergonomics. Um, they would be more likely to purchase labor-saving technology because it increases leisure, um, but it would not reduce worker income. Okay, whereas a capitalist would weigh, well, what's going to be more advantageous, more labor or more capital? Um, so the the kind of decision making is going to be different. So worker cooperatives are going to tend to be smaller than the comparable capitalist firm. A factor is that income per worker does not increase with greater size. So workers will, in a cooperative, have much less incentive to expand their business, whereas a capitalist will make greater profits with a bigger business. Um, so again, a characteristic is in order for a cooperative to decide to expand or hire more workers, well, that new worker is going to have to increase everybody's income, not just that worker's income. Whereas in a capitalist firm, if the worker increases the income of the owner, well, then they're going to hire the additional worker. So it creates a little bit of a greater hurdle um, uh, in making the decision to hire another worker. So, what is the solution if society needs more of what the firm is producing? Well, is the cooperative just going to be able to charge higher prices because there's greater demand for their work, but they don't want to get bigger? Well, no. Planners are going to start new cooperatives. So there's going to be a larger number of firms than in a capitalist framework. So, yeah, the planners would start new cooperatives and achieve full employment that way. Um, so, uh, clearly, Sarkar says an essential measure to control this economic exploitation of the capitalist financial markets is that speculative markets in all countries of the world should be closed down immediately. Okay, so Vanyek agrees with that. So there's really no scope for a stock market in a Proutist economy. It would be fundamentally inconsistent with a cooperative economy because all shares are going to be owned by the workers in that cooperative. So it's an open question. Is there going to be a bond market? Will local governments finance new enterprises or their own activities through sales of bonds? Vanyek suggests that there will be a bond market, and that will be the only kind of financial market in a cooperative economy. He also suggests that, well, maybe it's not healthy for workers to only have their investment tied in their own enterprise. Maybe they should have some of their savings in other enterprises through a bond market as well. So, um, Uh, then there's key industries, which are government owned and managed industries. There would be large firms that feed the rest of the economy. A clear example would be electrical utilities, for example. So they would be owned by block level governments or higher, if necessary, at the state level or national levels. uh, how would these enterprises be financed? Well, there could be direct lending from the central bank, depending on the size of the industry. Or there could be bond sales, again, by the local government, or else local governments, again, could borrow from the central bank. Um, or there may be retained earnings that could be kind of a hairy thing as key industries are supposed to operate on a nonprofit basis. So how much that they retain their earnings, even for their own expansion or necessary expansion. Again, that's something that requires a bit of discussion. And there can be socializing capitalist firms in the transition. So now shareholder-owned electrical utilities may be socialized, and Sarkar says, well, no, we're not going to compensate the former owners for those kinds of enterprises. Does that mean that those people are going to be left high and dry? No, they're going to have the same social guarantees for minimum requirements as anybody else in society, but they will not necessarily get compensated for firms that are taken over by a revolutionary government in the period of transition. Okay, well, as I suppose is predictable, that took me a little longer than I thought. I thought I would leave more time for questions and answers. Um, I guess I'll consult with John to tell me whether we can go overtime or not. And I'm willing to engage in discussion and answer questions if people would like. Perhaps we can make it voluntary. People who uh, think that they've withstood enough of or endured enough listening to me for the last hour um, are welcome to go. Otherwise, people who have questions or comments on anything I've said, again, I'm welcoming comments because I'm looking at this as an initial inquiry, not something that's final in any way. So, John, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think you stated it well. If you're willing to stay on, then I think it's up to individuals, if they feel like they have the time. I appreciate that you're flagging it because we do try and respect people's time. We're reaching out to people across a pretty broad, time zone range. So there are ramifications for people in different areas. But if you're willing to stay on, then I think it's up to the other, people in attendance if they'd like to stay on, post some questions. And if you have questions, I guess you could put them in the uh, chat or raise your hand, and we'll try and watch for that. And maybe Prakash can help watch for, raised hands, etc.
Okay. I see a question in the chat about the transition. Um, I wish I had more to say about that. And I wish Sarkar had more to say about that. Um, so, uh, well, I believe Sarkar was a revolutionary. Um, and I, I think when the public demand is there for a change in the way we do things, I think we should be there to very rightly and forcefully assert a more humane and workable economic system. Um, uh, Sarkar, in ways, he talks about doing things in stages as well. After that revolution occurs, for example, agricultural cooperatives will go through stages over probably many years. At first, members of agricultural cooperatives will retain ownership of their land. It's only very gradually that all land will go to the cooperatives. And it may be over a matter of decades. Um, so I know maybe Jagat Bandhu or others can think of other ways where Sarkar identifies where there are stages towards a more social um, uh, uh, kind of ownership or social means of producing things cooperatively. Um, so
I think
again,
one poss I,
Sarkar allows for simply, he calls, uses the term socializing rather than nationalizing. He doesn't like the term nationalizing, more socializing uh, firms that are presently operating. So we should be aware that great discontinuities in history are usually accompanied by great suffering. There's when society collapses. I hope we're not going to be witnessing that in coming times. If that happens, the suffering is great. When we might think it was a good thing that communism collapsed, but the suffering involved in that was tremendous. So, what we can do to avoid that, we should do. So, as much of our understanding of Prout as we can develop for when the time is ripe, I think it's important for us to have some idea of what we ought to be doing. I don't know if that answers the question, but uh,
Dr. Friedman, kind of related to that, are environmental circumstances one of the sort of catalysts that can encourage a transition. And it's my understanding that Sarkar indicated that while the Great Depression early in the last century was a deflationary depression, he made mention of a possible inflationary depression. And I think many people are kind of watching some of the actions of the current US administration. And I think a case could be made that some of the actions are going to produce some kind of an inflationary spiral. Do you think that kind of relates into this issue?
that could be. Sarkar said that would happen within 10 years, and within 10 years of him making that statement, there was the East Asian crisis, which was a horrendously severe depression that was global in scope, and it was inflationary. And there are special reasons that that was inflationary, that uh, it involved uh, uh, monetary monetary crises in several countries, and so the money in several countries suddenly became lost its value in international trading, and so goods, particularly imports into those countries, became horrendously expensive, and it was an inflationary depression. Um, whether circumstances like that will arise again, um, it's not clear. We had first a deflationary recession with COVID, and then it suddenly became inflationary because of sudden shutdowns in production. So that was kind of a special circumstances also. What kind of, if some kind of special circumstances like that arise again, um, I don't see that on the horizon, but uh, things like that, of course, are unpredictable.
How can you not see it? I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are at least five reasons that is going to happen.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I mean, first of all, you've got massive layoffs, which are going to be lead you into a depression or a recession. But you've got tariffs. Uh, Trump is now talking about all
That's
kinds
true.
of tariffs. That's going to be inflationary. So you've got that going on. We're probably going to have a bird flu pandemic. That's going to lead to the same problems we got with COVID. We've got an insane person running the NIH, that's going to make every kind of disease worse. That's going to lead to the same kind of supply chain problems we had with COVID, multiplied by a million. So I don't understand what you're not seeing. Uh,
Well, yeah, those are things that
let me
are
throw a couple
definitely
of more at
concerning.
you.
They have not
We're not going
manifest
to
yet.
have any
So
protect. I'm going to throw a couple more. We're not going to have any protection against terrorism in the United States. I don't know which way that sends the economy, but as we get rid of the CIA and the FBI, we're basically just saying, please come in and invade us. How anybody can. So that's going to be a mess. So I don't know what that's going to do to the economy, but it's going to cause a lot of problems. So, I mean, we basically got an idiocracy, and the economy is going to be a mess. It's definitely going to be a recession or a depression, whether it will, and most likely inflationary, because the supply chains will not work. So I think there's plenty of reason to imagine we're going to get exactly that. Sorry, I I'm sorry to step on you, but
no,
it,
no, those are all valid things. I'm very, very averse to pulling out a crystal ball.
yeah,
But
I don't blame you, but I mean, I don't think you need a crystal ball. I think you just need to read the paper. But
well, we'll see. Uh, Ray Shivakumar.
Yes. Um, then also we've seen the beginnings. I don't know how much longer it's going to last and how large this deporting of illegal aliens is going to be. I thought we had a kind of a stable system. There were communities like in Springfield, Ohio, for example, that were doing quite well with a lot of illegal aliens helping. I mean, crops rotting in the fields if we don't have anybody to pick them. So, what do you think if that continues to any great degree? What influence that might have?
Um, well, again, it's destabilizing for no good reason. Uh, so, to echo what you say, I know where I live in southern Minnesota, there's a lot of communities that were in severe decline that were stabilized because of the immigration of Hispanic and Somali uh, migrants.
Mhm.
Um, well, Sarkar uh, kind of addresses the problem of that. Yes, um, migrant workers or immigrant workers, if they're not embedded in the community, can destabilize a local economy. What he calls floating workers. What he says, well, those workers kind of have to make a choice. Either they settle in the community and merge their interests in the local economy, or they really shouldn't be there. So how that applies to a capitalist economy is not entirely clear. Um, that uh, it is uh, certainly problematic to simply open the borders when uh, conditions in surrounding countries are such that families are in terror because of crime, political persecution, or simply lack of economic opportunities. People, I think, don't leave their culture and their their friends and families for small reasons. I think part and parcel of the solution is certainly stabilizing the places where people come from. Otherwise, I think certainly we will have to work harder to integrate the people who are here. I don't know if that answers your question, but that uh, I think if they can really integrate themselves into the local economies, then they should be welcome.
Yeah, well, it just seems like if Trump really, and I understand that he really wants to deport a lot of people, that could seriously affect our workforce in terms of having enough people to do the tasks that are needed to be done.
I
Oh,
mean,
sure.
if I may also jump in, I mean, the U.S., it looks like is going to actually start having more deaths than births in the near future. And so without immigration, the workforce is going to experience a significant decline in the U.S. One of the reasons a number of economists believe that the U.S. has actually done better than most other well-to-do countries in the last 3 to 4 years is because we've had so much immigration that it's actually helped improve the growth rate in the United States. So honestly, it's most every economic estimate I've seen, and Maya Tita, correct me if I'm wrong, shows that on balance, immigrants have been a net benefit to the U.S. economy. Even if they are sending money back, they are still, by and large, adding more to the U.S. economy than they're subtracting. And so, Sarkar's point, it makes sense in general. Yes, you don't want immigrants coming and sending all their money away. That takes vitality out of the economy, but that doesn't seem to be the net effect of immigration into the U.S. and never has been. The net effect has tended to be positive. And it's only going to be more so if we are experiencing an actual contraction of our population size, which seems to be what's starting to happen. So this is another policy, unfortunately, and I'm going to shut up in a second, so I apologize. But there's this idea among people who don't understand how economies work that economies are zero sum, that if one person comes in and takes a job, that's somehow taking it away from somebody else. This idea that economic activity is multiplicative is something that's very hard for people to understand. And so when you try and say that, look, if immigrants come in, they create economic activity that actually creates more jobs for everyone, that idea is lost. And it's very easy for someone like Trump to play on fear and hatred and turn immigrants into demons in people's minds rather than what I think we all understand is pretty much the opposite. My teacher's point is good. People ultimately don't really want to leave their homes. They only do it because conditions in their homes are dire. And I think everybody would rather stay in the country they were born in if conditions there allowed it. But they leave because conditions there are frightening. They're dire. They can't make a living, or they're afraid of being murdered or persecuted or whatever the problem is. And so they leave. And you can't blame them. Anyone would under those circumstances. So I don't have the answer either, but the answer is certainly not wholesale deportation or wholesale fear of deportation.
Well said.
I don't think it
Yeah.
was, but thanks for.
I
Chris?
can't make my hand go up, my thing. I don't know how to, doesn't work. Can I just
see
ask
it.
a question?
Yeah.
So, okay, so what does Sarkar say anything about like, I mean, according to what he says about the Varnas, that capitalism will become so what, unproductive, chaotic, that it'll, I mean, he says a bunch of different things, but does he talk about, I mean, what can you think of that Sarkar talks about? I mean, what should we be doing to prepare for the so-called collapse of capitalism, or that how might that happen? Or do you understand what I mean? I mean,
Mhm.
Sarkar does, I mean, he doesn't say much, right?
Well, I think it's going to be hard for us to visualize the time when the time has come. And
Yeah, good point.
I think exercises like this are valuable, where we have discussions and really work out the alternatives that we have
Right,
have the alternatives in place, and be active in communities and start promoting alternative institutions. Most places have a housing crisis. Well, we can propose, let's start building housing cooperatives, to
mhm.
get it out of the speculative market, um, et cetera.
Yeah, they have there are those in California especially, and then you've got eco villages and master units, and
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, the more that we can actually start building alternative institutions, I think the better. And I think
right.
some proutists are working with local authorities on emergency planning and things like that.
Mhm. Right. But what is Sarkar doesn't say a lot about that.
About what specifically?
About transitioning from capitalism to a Prout system.
Um, yeah, not so much concrete. There's some quotes that it'll be like a firecracker, it'll explode like a
Right.
firecracker.
I've heard that one, yeah.
Um, and other quotes that it might happen more gradually in some cases. So um, I
Prakash
think
has
we
his
just
hand
take
up.
whatever opportunities we can. Yeah,
Right.
Prakash.
Yeah, I think he has, when you look at his economic model, uh, being focused on cooperatives is the key part, and also community-owned, large-scale businesses, enterprises, key industries, that there's a huge movement for growing the cooperative movement in this country. And so,
Right.
Mhm,
when things are collapsing, you need something to be replacing that. And so
mhm,
the
Right.
more cooperatives we have, the more examples we have of how other ways to doing things. And then
Right.
during the pandemic, what was happening, there was so many mutual aid societies and people coming together, and people who are
Mhm.
working in a cooperative way did much, much better than people who were just isolated. And
Right. Yeah.
so it's creating and explaining that there are other ways. And I think the other strategy that P.R. Sarkar had was that he didn't just create Prout, which was the socioeconomic philosophy. He also created movements. One example would be the whole movement in neo-humanist education, which is growing all over the world, especially, in non-Western countries. Um, and it's preparing people to live in that cooperative type society. People are growing up with ethical, spiritual, progressive values, kind of just inculcated in them, and through that education. So that model of neo-humanism um, is a key component. The other part is all the development work with Amrit. The Amrit, the Nandamart Universal Relief Team for men and women, was working all over the world for the last 50 years. Um, and the work keeps expanding and growing, and more, they're using principles in the kind of development work they're doing, so that they're not just serving people in disasters, that are actually preparing alternatives. So within Haiti,
there's a growing movement of cooperative enterprises run by women, hundreds of them, thousands of women involved in self-help
Yeah.
groups, together with cooperative farms. So they're creating a model that's thriving in the midst of this chaos in Haiti, as well as they're having a huge impact on the education system. So those are the kinds of things that, yes, things will fall apart, but we can't really change some of that. But what we can do is we can show by example how to live
Right.
in other ways and create the foundations and the examples for people to look to.
Right. So is there, like what you're talking about, I haven't really heard about that, but like what's going on in Haiti and also where's a good way to find out about that? I mean, it seems like here in the US, we don't have that much going on.
I think we might have something on our website about the project work in Haiti.
Oh, yeah, you do, right.
And there was a short presentation at our Prout conference about that. We need to add it to our website, but it's definitely, as an example. And then in Nigeria, there's one monk who's been working there for 15 years, and he's got developed women's hospitals, particularly maternal hospitals, family, children, and serving thousands of people in a community-owned enterprises. And Amert started them in collaboration with the local communities, but the ownership and the leadership is being transitioned and embedded in the local communities.
Wow, that's
So those
great.
are example of like, a smaller scale, but a key industry. Hospital provides a key service, and around it you
Mhm.
develop cooperatives and many ways of doing things. So I think that's people don't realize there's more members in cooperatives in the US than there are in labor unions.
Wow,
And
that's
if you
amazing.
haven't done so, I encourage everyone to subscribe to the Proud Alliance newsletter. Find out what's going on and check on the Proudest Universal website as well.
Which is prout.info, .info.
Mhm.
And so to answer your question further, I think, again, we should not neglect spiritual propagation. I think that's going to be key to, we can see that in times of instability, people can turn to fascism as much as
Right.
anything else. So we have to really be changing people's consciousness to have them reach for something better.
Right now we've got the politics of cruelty playing out.
Oh,
Yeah,
Counter to that
awful.
is that of compassion, and that's where
Stupid cruelty.
the spiritual is. Yeah, well, stupid cruelty makes you stupid because you're not thinking about anything but yourself and your self-interest, and you
yeah,
forget everyone's embedded in this world, and so you cause harm to others, it's going to come back. So
yeah.
I think a lot of the tariffs, all these tariffs with China, China's basically seen this huge opportunity that with the dismantlement of U.S. aid, China's now, in a position to begin taking over a lot of the kind of role that USA played around the world.
Right.
And they've been developing that. They're becoming the leaders in solar energy and alternative energies and all the ways in which Trump is saying, oh, we're just going to drill by drill and we're going to end electric cars. It's just going to harm our industries for maybe some short-term gain for some billionaires, but it's going to be making so many other countries in the world be more prosperous than us because of our stupidity.
So there's the shift right now in the economy. If you look at it from the point of view of a world economy, and China's not a straight capitalist economy.
No.
And so right now, would you say there's kind of these little pockets of different forms of economies and they're like you were talking about China and what Trump, I mean, people will say, well, the US is the richest country in the world, you know, and our economy is so great. And so maybe that's a big shift that's going to happen as far
Because
as,
we measure our economic by the gross national product and GDP, per person, and we're not looking at purchasing power. Purchasing
right, right,
capacity is going down and down,
right,
and a huge from 50 years ago, the people who were like, our age 50 years ago, we had that whole, maybe had 20% of the nation's wealth. And now that same group of people, not us, but the people who are younger, who were our age, like we were 50 years ago, they have 4% of the nation's wealth.
right,
That's equivalent to $50 trillion in wealth that's been transferred from middle class upwards. So middle class is shrinking. It's far fewer percentage of the population than it was, in the 60s and 70s.
right.
And that's completely unsustainable because, yeah, you can't not have people being able to purchase. And then all you have is speculation instead of investment and community.
Right. So when Sarkar says that capitalism is gonna fall like a cracker, like will explode like a firecracker, is he talking about the stock market crashing? But for
The metaphor,
actually,
we don't know what it means and how it will come about. But Trump
right,
certainly seems to be
I,
playing with fire and
yeah, I will
bringing
say
up.
one, if I may interrupt quickly, Prakash, just no, a favorite quote I just heard yesterday from one of my favorite economists. The stock market is not the economy. The stock market is
right,
not the economy. The stock market is not the economy. So
Yeah.
it's that's all. He just said it 3 times and it's true. Trump thinks the stock market is the economy, but the stock market is not the economy. So it takes more than a stock market crash to kill an economy. But I don't know either what it's going to be. So I'm sorry to interrupt, Prakash, but I just
No,
wanted to say.
I've said enough.
Well, I've said too much as usual, but yeah, it's got to be more than the stock market, whatever it is. But capitalism is
A systems
unfortunately
collapse of some kind.
capitalism is stunningly resilient. But
Mhm.
I think, and we've seen it survive many things it should not survive. But I think we may be finally seeing its limits tested in ways that we have never seen before. But it is unbelievably resilient. And so it takes a lot to kill it. So we'll see. That's why over the years, I've seen many proudest say, okay, capitalism's finally going to crash. This is the thing that's going to do it. And it didn't
right.
happen.
No,
And so,
Well, therefore my reluctance to say
I,
anything along those lines.
I mean, I'm willing to say things are going to go poorly, but I'm not willing to say capitalism's going to die yet because, it's ridiculously resilient. But who knows?
I think I might want to interject at this point. We've got an extra half hour.
yeah,
Again,
Mhm.
maybe being sensitive to people further east, it may be good to conclude the session for this evening. Want to thank Dr. Friedman for, I think it was very informative and it's a list of different elements like that starts really underscoring what we don't know yet.
Mhm.
In terms of what we should be doing or how we are going to do things, in a Prout neo-humanism based economy. And that's where the real need is to really be figuring these things out. Um, I I made the comment about Milton Friedman. One of I often will quote him on the issue about crises, basically whether real or perceived are the only time that things really change. And he continues with that quote, but you know, I think we are sort of set up right now for some crises. And I think many folks probably on this program are familiar with the Overton window, about what's politically feasible and what's impossible. And the reality is crises and challenge kind of shift that window. So things that
Yeah.
maybe 5 years ago couldn't happen or can't happen today, maybe in the next few years, things are going to be such that people will be looking in earnest for something that will work as they see, maybe the ultimate, the internal contradictions are just going to accelerate with current leadership. And I think the other thing that's interesting is seeing that almost on a global level. So I think there are significant ramifications because of that. But I want to thank Dr. Friedman for putting together what I know is a very challenging presentation. And I thank people's questions, and I'm sorry we didn't get to address all of them, but I think there are some great questions, and I think there's work to be done, and it's great to see people interested in that and engaging in that. So thank you all for attendance.
Thank
Please
you.
look for future programs. We will continue to try and present interesting topics on a monthly basis and engage in discussion.
Thank you, Maya Tita. It's very nice.
Thank you.
A pleasure. Good night.
Good night.
Let's go.
Yeah. I think there's people here probably aren't actually here.
Well, and did you stop recording or?
I did, yeah.
Okay, great.
Um,
I'm here. I'm enjoying it very much. Thank you.
oh, okay, Don, I didn't. Okay. Yeah, I felt like something I had a lot to say there at the end,
Well, it's sort of underscoring what many of us that have been around for a while recognize is that there's a great theory integrated in many kind of incredible ways, but the practical application, in day-to-day mundane reality is where I think some of the real work has to be. And at this point, and I think that's where people that are probably doing some of the best work are the folks that are trying to, just get in the real world, in at the block level or community level, and
right.
and getting to know other people. I think the program coming up on collaboration will be important because as well as I think Ramesh's program, kind of a quick overview of some of the other kinds of movements that are at least in some sort of alignment potentially
Right.
with Prout, and there are huge numbers of people mobilized in some of those efforts as well. So, but yeah, we haven't been able to meet as the finance committee for some time, and
Exactly, yeah. I was
This
thinking,
recording will go up online.
yeah, I have to work with Vigidar on that. I think we're several recordings behind to figure out our budget.
It's really good.
Yeah.
Significant, I think.
Pardon?
It's significant, I think.
Yes, exactly.
Including the questions, of course. Don't cut out the questions.
Yeah, no, I didn't stop
Very
recording.
interesting.
So
Yeah, okay.
a little
All right,
bit.
thanks very much, guys.
Okay,
Yeah,
it's great
thank
seeing you,
you,
Dada.
Dada.
Later. Good
I'm
night.
glad I'm glad that everything came through with your family.
Finally, yes.
Nation. That must be a big relief.
All right. And now I'm just about broke again, but
Oh, really?
no problems, no complaints at all. Building's finished. Okay, take
Okay.
care.
Bye.
Namaskar.
Namaskar, Dadaji.
All right. Yeah, we had some of those meetings, and then we with PRI and Prout Alliance, and then we said, okay, we need a task force, and that was be including myself and Mahadeva and Nanta and Dada and I think maybe Devaki, and then of course we want to invite you to be part of that to figure something out. And I've had, I don't know, my hands full in the last I was down in North Carolina for a week
Oh, wow.
doing a juice fast and staying at the PRI.
Oh,
We were the first people to stay down in the new bedrooms in the basement, you know.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Well, I know when I don't hear from you, I know it's because you're incredibly tied up and buried with stuff, and I understand that.
but I feel like I've got some time now. Well, I need to move forward because, yep, because we have to figure out, the campaign. There's so many activities going. There's no time to plan for fundraising. It's like an event after
Yeah.
event after an event, and they're
Well, and I know you haven't even had a chance to look at it, but I tried to get a draft going on how Proud Alliance can fund projects. So we can start getting Proud Alliance out of this, ad hoc requests and, the kind of thing that Jop and others have talked about where, all of a sudden there's a request for a worthwhile thing. And so, steering committee members are having to come out of their own pockets to fund it. So trying to build some sort of process that we can refer people to and sort of streamline and systematize that effort.
oh, this is the document. Okay, the project proposal support policy and procedures.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
so maybe glance through that. I've shared it with the task force that's working on well, we've started on the bylaws and have kind of hiked that now to the steering committee for review, but
Right.
but yeah, I've been working on the policy and procedure
Yeah.
manual.
My own only thought about the bylaws. It seems like um, we don't talk about a quorum when it comes to, say, the steering committee. Say an example of the steering committee, if a majority of the steering committee can vote to remove somebody but we don't define a quorum in that context. So if three people met, two of them could say they wanted to do that, and one person didn't, and but we don't define a quorum. It seems like that would be
Yeah,
important.
I think, and actually the work we did on that so long ago now, um, I think we were trying to talk about consent decision making and even if someone weren't present but it's on the
Right.
steering committee, that they are supposed to be contacted and in effect vote. But I can't remember how we really tried to codify that in the bylaws. Because yeah, you run that risk.
That's what happened at the International Association of Intimate Massage. That the staff, the board shrunk down, and they had one of the staff members on the board as a voting member, and then there was just a few people, and they voted off. They brought another staff member on the board and voted off one of the trainers. So basically took over the organization, running for the benefit of the staff. But the staff
Right.
weren't trainers. And it wasn't like we had the bosses that were the trainers. The trainers were actually the ones generating the membership and the revenue.
Right,
It's
right.
starting to have the staff who say, okay, they're not committed to the mission of InfoMassage, they're committed to the business of, generating, supporting themselves through offering trainings. And if they can make more money by compromising,
Yeah,
just so many things. And so they formed a whole entirely different organization.
yeah. Well, and I've seen
I
that.
don't want that to happen, you see.
Right. And I think, throughout, some of us, our history goes clear back to the very beginning of this. And the idea was to create a strong central control, but then really control who's in that, who serves on the steering committee. But I encourage you to I think you're raising a good point. Um, and I know we tried to address how decision making was supposed to be done, not only with
The
the
General
General
Assembly,
Assembly, but also with the steering committee. So take a look at that, and if you just see some weaknesses in it, let's address that.
yeah, I mean, I think we had that, right. Okay. So yeah, so that I guess that was it seemed the one thing that happened with the IAM, Infant Massage Association in the US, which is where it of course started with IMMA. um, they had staff attending meetings, but then they became voting board members, and
Uh,
that becomes a conflict.
yeah, yeah,
Like even when you have an executive director attending board meetings, they're not a voting board member.
right, right,
They'll attend the voting, they'll attend the executive sessions of the board, but again, they're not a voting board member.
yeah. No, I agree, and I think that's one of the first things that, as Proud Alliance looks at staffing, an executive director is one of the positions, even if it's some kind of part-time basis, that needs to be, and I agree, they need to be at steering committee meetings, but they are not a voting member. They in effect work for the steering committee.
Right, and you can have, I mean, when I was in United for a Fair Economy, when we had maybe 3 or 4 board meetings a week, like 2 or 3 days, and the first, well, 2 days. And the first day, the staff attended, all the key staff members, not necessarily every single person, but the key members. And the second day, we had the executive director and the CFO, the
Yeah,
attending.
yeah, no, that makes
That was
sense.
like, again, the staff members had a lot of say, but they weren't voting. And that seemed like it's remained successful and stable. And they made transitions with, executive directors, and eventually ended up with a woman from El Salvador who was great. And she's, had been working for them many, many years, and then now the executive director. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
feel, yeah, that can be, you can move from being a staff member to being a board member, but um, you probably was no longer be on a staff member.
right. Yeah, yeah, you end up with some of those issues. Yeah, I think, and part of my longer term vision about issues like this is there will be many ways at the point that Proud Alliance is recognized as any kind of threat to the status quo.
Yeah.
Attempts to undermine, redirect, infiltrate, you know, provocateur, the whole list. But one of them is to take over an organization, just,
You're very small and you don't have clear bylaws. That can happen.
yeah, exactly. Well, and that's where, you know, the task force is really trying to drill down to, it was a legitimate objection to the bylaws being too detailed, but a conversation that task force has had is, on the other hand, what I've argued is that policy and procedure should be detailed. It should be
Yes,
very clear
absolutely.
about how you do whatever it is.
Right.
And And so that's been the way I've been approaching it. And I think we're in agreement. I mean, we just had a meeting day before yesterday,
Yeah.
with the task force, and that was one of the issues. I'd sort of created a format and had started filling in some examples. And so I think we've agreed on that as a useful mechanism that links pretty conveniently back to the bylaws, for where the
Yeah.
authority is. And so it goes both directions. If someone is looking at a policy and they want to know how did this get set up and who had the authority, they can link back to the bylaws, or in the bylaws, if someone's sitting there, like with your question, how do you address steering committee voting? Well, you should be able to go to the policy and procedure and see.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And what's, exactly what's happening with our current president is that he's basically saying, well, we're going to abolish or break all of the policies and procedures, and it's just going to be whatever whim I want to say. Oh, we're going to take over Canada. Oh, we're going, I'm going to rebuild the Gaza Strip for luxury hotels and
Yeah,
everybody
tourism.
out, or we're going to take. It's like now he's basically Musk has said he didn't like the black South Africans leadership. So Trump is saying, the only people we'll accept from South Africa are white people who are being persecuted, and we're going to cut out all our funding. Most of the funding we're giving to South Africa is for the fight against AIDS.
Yeah,
It's good. And then what? Someone who was one of the big someone he pardoned was someone who had been one of the biggest fentanyl distributors. Why in the world? He's talking all about how drugs flooding into the country. So who does he go and pardon? Fentanyl.
yeah,
It's just like totally, he's moving on the whim, and people just humor him. All right, you want this guy? All right, you have him. Everyone's afraid. All the Republicans are afraid that they'll be, primaried out or something like that. Or
yeah. Well, and I know some people see, I mean, Bannon's strategy was to just overwhelm the media with just a bunch of noise,
right.
just a lot of stuff that gets people agitated, working, operating out of fear, etc. But the real issue behind the scenes is fundamentally just dismantling the federal government.
That's what Musk is doing in practice. It's like what he did to Twitter.
Yeah,
He fired 80% of the staff. He'd probably like to fire 80% of the government. But that's
yeah,
going to make it impossible for Trump to do what he wants to do. I mean, it's like he's going to say, okay, well, now we dismantle these, and now we're going to use the military. Your primary role is to suppress the population. That's not going to go over well.
right. Yeah, yeah,
Generals, it's like
yeah. Well,
it's
I think my personal take on the administration was, I think it was the only thing that should happen was to just finally put, the extremists in power and just overplay their hand, which they're going to do. They are just going, and the sad part is it's going to create a lot of suffering. My Tita touched on that, the reality is we just need the extreme, on steroids version of neoliberalism
instead of
just
the
run amok.
billionaires influencing the government, we'll have them running the government.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, it's like, okay, we never quite imagined that, I don't know. I mean, at a certain
I,
point, I can't imagine. I mean, the Republicans have to run with MAGA people running against them. So they'll lose the primary, even if it means that the person who beats them is going to get crushed in the general election. It's like, at some point, how much voter suppression can they do?
yeah.
Have to eliminate, pretty much. Well, I think Trump is hoping that he could become a dictator and remain in power, but it's like,
Yeah, yeah, I don't think he's even thinking in terms of future elections. I think he wants to, he's got some heroes out there, Vladimir and Erdogan, and there's a few.
Odie and all these other.
Yeah,
I mean, Europe. Europe must be kind of like pulling his hair out, saying, "Okay, what is this?" Basically, he said, I'm going to be now supporting Putin instead of NATO. That's what it's, he acts like that, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, it it's but I guess I see it as probably you know, I saw the election as how bad does it have to get for real change to start becoming, you know, on the table and under discussion. And the fact that it that it went with Trump told me it had to be a lot worse.
Well, what he was, you know, a lot of the reason he won is because there was millions of people who were removed from the voting rolls.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So,
Yeah,
I
no,
mean,
there's just,
it's
you
just,
know, you can whatever the Republicans accuse other people of is generally what they're doing.
yes, all the
Themselves.
vote rigging is done by the Republicans, you know.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's all
Not done at the poll, it's done in advance, you know.
yeah, yeah,
People being able to cast their votes, yeah. So we should set a time to meet, I think, maybe, right?
yeah, yeah. What might work for you?
Oh, okay, let's look at next week. All right. Oh, we're in February. Um,
So that's the week of the 17th.
yeah.
What might work for you?
Well, I could do something like Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday afternoon.
Why don't we do Wednesday? I've got on Tuesday, I've got a meeting that starts later in the afternoon and it might kind of push us. So, and I on Wednesday, I've got a meeting that, or a couple of meetings that go to about noon. So anytime after noon, my time.
Okay. 3 p.m.
Um,
3 p.m. Does that work?
your time?
3 p.m. my time, which is noon your time.
Yeah, yeah, that should work.
Okay. Hmm. And I'll look over your. Okay.
Yeah, no, I would really value your thoughts on it. And and the way I looked at it was, you know, it probably needs work, but sometimes just getting something out on the table for people to start working with
Yeah. Yeah.
is the way to try and find our way to, you know, something that'll really work or serve our needs.
Okay. Let's see.
By the way, do you save the chat?
It's automatically saved.
Yeah. Because you know, a couple of the folks that have been question marks in the past were on,
Yeah.
and
Whatever.
they
They were
actually were
making. They
posing
were.
some interesting questions.
Yeah. I mean, one person was saying, you know, global centralized bank in Prout. I've never heard that, you know. That was something new to me.
Yeah,
I'm not sure whether that makes sense or not, you know.
yeah. Well, I think Maya Tita said that.
Yeah, he
Um,
did, and that's was being questioned by Satya. That person
yeah,
didn't know, and then this another person said he was in, or they were in investments and acquisition. Want to
acquisitions,
get out
yeah,
of that.
mergers
What?
and acquisitions.
And wants to get out of that or do something. So, yes, it seems a serious interest. It's like they're not doing anything to be disruptive, you know.
Well, and some of the comments,
I need to step out of the room for 1 second. I'll hear you, but I.
okay, yeah, some of the comments sort of suggested that they have some familiarity with Prout.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, so you know, but I don't know that we've ever been able to figure out who they actually are.
Oh, because, um, yeah. Yeah, there was a person, Dieter Emmerich, but he's not, he hadn't registered, wasn't in our mailing list, or I couldn't find him in the Path of Bliss or Proud or on Facebook, so I don't know who that was. But he was asking interesting, they were asking interesting questions.
Yeah, I think, you know, a few programs back, that person signed on a couple of different ways.
Okay.
And I've done this, you know, to the extent I can go into Wild Apricot and try and track down. And so I think it's someone like Satya. In other words,
Yeah.
I connect Dieter, Satya, and who is the other one? There's three of them now that it look like they may kind of know each other. So one of them, I think Satya actually registers. And so
Yeah,
someone like that could just be sharing the link.
right. And just we have an email address, but don't know where.
Yeah, yeah, the
I don't know what duck.com is, but
yeah, yeah.
let's see how many of things
Well, and you don't
he's
know
signed
if
up. He's been signing up for events all the way back to December 23, but he missed a lot of them, but
yeah. Well,
said
and
attended
yeah, and I
the
think
annual conference and yeah.
yeah, the thing that's hard to figure out is if early on it was just a clumsy attempt at infiltration and disruption or what and now you can't tell if they've figured out that they've got to be a little more subtle about it. In other words, it's hard to define whether they're actually someone that's interested in Prout or someone whose role is to be disruptive in the long run.
Well, they got 130 emails from us and they've opened 39. And so they've opened, yeah. In 2025, they've opened three out of right. Somehow, yep.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we'll see. I mean, like, if someone's infiltrating us, they're not going to be worried that, well, just these guys are going to be taken over.
Right.
Uh, well, okay. So I sent you that announcement. I mean, the invitation.
Okay, great.
All right.
Well, good to see you.
Yes, I'll see you next. Great. Namaskar.
Namaskar.